Okay, let's just dive right in. We're going to try something that sounds a bit like academic alchemy. We're taking one of the most, well, rigorous and surprising lenses you can find, the analysis of the 1930s Marxist revolutionary Leon Trotsky, and using it to decode 21st century populism.
It sounds like a stretch.
It does, but the framework is, you'll see, incredibly useful.
And our mission today is really specific. It's a focused comparison.
Exactly. We're applying Trotsky's framework, which was, designed for the rise of fascism in Germany, to two movements happening right now. We have U.S. Trumpism, or MAGA, on one side.
And on the other, the UK's Reform UK, led by Nigel Farage.
Right. And on the surface, they look similar. Both are anti-establishment, both hit immigration really hard. They both claim to speak for the quote-unquote forgotten people. But the outcome, the actual political threat they represent, it just feels profoundly different.
It does.
So our mission is to figure out why. Why does the U.S. threat feel so explosive, so system level, while the U.K. threat seems, I don't know, more contained, more electoral, and just less revolutionary?
And that comparison, I think, it reveals everything about the health of institutions. Trotsky gives us this really clinical framework to look at crisis. His core warning wasn't just about some generic right-wing anger.
No.
He said fascism emerges when the existing ruling class is in crisis, and it essentially outsources its own defense.
Yeah.
They mobilize mass discontent, often from these desperate, economically flattened sectors, to preserve their own power structure.
And suppress labor in the process.
Violently.
Yeah.
And we see the ingredients for that kind of crisis in both the U.S. and U.K. You've got stagnation, you've got chronic inequality, rising cultural resentments. The raw materials are there.
So the key is the processing. It's like the raw ingredients are sitting there, but the institutions, the culture, that's the machine that processes it all.
Precisely.
And it turns it into either a revolutionary substance or maybe just a lot of political noise.
That's the perfect analogy. The outcome is entirely divergent because the institutional, the social, and even the emotional differences between the U.S. and the U.K., they just create two completely different political beasts. We're basically going from the high-octane fuel of rage in the U.S. to the low-grade fuel of weariness in the U.K.
Okay, so let's start with that fuel itself, the economic pressure cooker.
Sure.
If you look at the source material on inequality, the distinction is it's stark.
It really is.
In the U.S., inequality isn't just high, it's described as extreme, and it's been rising relentlessly, almost like a vertical line since the 70s. That sharp, sustained climb that creates a truly combustible climate. It's the engine for MAGA mobilization.
And the feeling is the system is actively crushing me.
Right now.
That feeling of active crushing is so important. Now, contrast that with the UK. Inequality definitely surged there, mainly in the Thatcher years, in the 1980s.
Yeah.
But since then, since that initial explosion, the level has more or less stabilized.
At a high level, though.
Oh, absolutely. It's chronic, it's entrenched, it's grinding. But it hasn't had that same kind of exponential, destabilizing, sharp rise that you see in the U.S. data.
And this is where Trotsky's analysis really proves its worth, isn't it? He argued that fascism grows specifically from those groups that feel genuinely crushed.
Right. Those caught between big capital on one side and organized labor on the other.
That feeling of being flattened, of watching your social status just vanish in real time, that fits the sharp emotional profile of the U.S. movement so much more intensely.
Whereas the U.K., by contrast, expresses its political anger more as frustration.
Frustration and cynicism, not the revolutionary spark of, outright insurrection.
And that frustration is now heavily, heavily sorted by education. That's become the big political fault line everywhere.
In the U.S., the polarization is just exceptionally sharp. A college degree almost automatically means you're a Democrat, no degree, and you're very likely Republican or an AJ.
And that non-degree group became profoundly radicalized. They feel culturally and economically just, dismissed by the educated elites.
The UK has this divide too, for sure, but it feels milder. It's there.
It is, but it's not as absolute. Graduates tend to go Labor or Lib Dem. Non-graduates lean conservative or now Reform. But the political temperature is just lower.
Yeah, if we're talking about actual radicalization, that point where people are willing to, break democratic norms, the U.S. has crossed a threshold that the UK hasn't.
Which brings us directly to a key term from Trotsky, the petty bourgeoisie.
Right, we can't just gloss over that one.
No. This group, the small business owner, the independent contractor, the person who feels constantly on the brink of economic collapse, Trotsky said they become the reactionary base only when they genuinely lose their social footing. And in the U.S., this group radicalized. It became the grassroots force at the MAGA rallies and, well, at the Capitol on January 6th.
And for us, I think the key distinction is how class itself is perceived in the two countries, because that dictates how people react when the system fails them.
Yeah.
In the U.S., class identity is deeply aspirational. You have the American dream myth, which means almost everyone, no matter their real situation, calls themselves middle class.
Right.
So when that myth shatters, when they realize that social mobility is a sham, it produces this incredibly volatile, rage-driven revolt against elites. They feel personally betrayed by the nation's foundational promise.
Whereas the UK view is just fundamentally different. Class is cultural, it's historical, it's baked into your accent, your geography, your opportunities.
So when this system fails in the UK, it doesn't shatter some big aspirational myth.
No, it just reinforces a cynical reality that's already there.
Well, of course, the people in charge are useless.
Exactly. It produces boredom, cynicism, and protest folks. You want to change the actors, but you're not trying to burn down the entire theater.
And that, from a Trotskyist viewpoint, is everything. That cultural difference is the distance between a mass, mobilized movement ready for revolutionary action.
And just a deep, weary sigh at the ballot box.
So if that rage is the fuel, now we need to look at the engine, the institutional structures that shape how that anger gets expressed and, crucially, mobilized.
Right, let's get into the structures. And the media ecosystem has to be first. It's the mobilization engine.
In the U.S., it's a 247 machine, isn't it?
It is. You think about the entire infrastructure, partisan, cable news, talk radio, social media algorithms, all reinforcing each other. The whole system works like a MAGA identity factory. It's constantly feeding grievances, reaffirming the in-group's anger, and just systematically demonizing the out-group. It's an ideological hardening machine.
And the UK simply lacks that.
It doesn't have it. Yes, you've got hyper-partisan newspapers, but the critical difference is broadcast media. TV still reaches a huge majority of the public, and it's regulated. It's so much less inflammatory than U.S. cable news.
Plus, trust and legacy news, while it's going down, is still measurably higher there.
Right. And without that constantly running high-volume identity megaphone, you just can't manufacture that deep, hardened, MAGA-style political identity that you need for a mass radicalized movement.
I do want to push back a little, though, on the nature of distrust, because this feels like a really key divergence. You said U.S. distrust is ideological, government is evil, while UK distrust is pragmatic, government is useless.
That's right.
But if you look at the last few years in the UK, I mean, the constant scandals, the sheer incompetence around Brexit and COVID, doesn't that pragmatic distrust eventually hit a tipping point where it becomes ideological?
That is a crucial question.
When people lose all faith that the government can do even the simplest things right, doesn't that open the door for a truly anti-state doctrine?
The source material suggests no, or at least not yet.
Yeah.
The UK population distrusts specific politicians, yes, ones in power. They absolutely despise incompetence. But they haven't yet abandoned the underlying concept of a civil service or the democratic machine itself.
So they don't want to abolish government.
They want a more competent government. In the U.S., the MAGA base often sees any federal action, no matter who's in charge, as inherently illegitimate, hostile even.
Okay. That's the difference. The UK system is just irritated. It's suffering from competence fatigue. But the U.S. structure is actively undermined by a base that rejects its very legitimacy.
And that connects directly to something else Trotsky said a nationalist movement needs.
A single, unified national myth.
Precisely. And the U.S. structure, for all its polarization, provides a very strong ideological container for that.
Yeah.
You have that clear urban-rural divide that maps almost perfectly onto red states and blue states.
So the movement can claim to speak for real America.
Right. Whereas the UK structure just completely fragments that nationalist potential. The political geography is a patchwork of competing loyalties.
You've got Scotland with the SNP and independence, Wales with its own strong labor tradition, then different regions in England with their own anxiety.
And don't forget Northern Ireland, which is its own separate political system entirely.
So the UK doesn't have one national myth. It has, what, 4 competing ones?
At least. And Reform UK, Farage. They cannot possibly claim to speak for a single, unified nationalist identity when the nation itself is so constitutionally and emotionally fractured.
The source material is very clear on this, that fragmentation is one of the UK's most powerful structural defenses against a MAGA-style movement.
You can't mobilize a unified reactionary mass movement if you don't have a unified vision of the nation you're trying to reclaim.
Which brings us to the big final question. If we're using this very stringent, very specific Trotskyist lens, why is calling Reform UK the British MAGA just lazy and wrong?
Yeah, let's nail down the 5 crucial divergences that the analysis gives us.
Okay.
First, the mobilized mass. Trotsky required a highly mobilized petty bourgeois movement. MAGA has thousands of motivated active followers who are constantly engaged in street politics. Reform doesn't. Its support is older, it's much less mobilized, more skeptical, and far more geographically dispersed. They're voters, not activists.
Second, and this is critical, the party of civil war. That's a key term for Trotsky.
It is.
He meant the presence of a street force, militias, insurrectionists, a group ready to use physical violence to get what it wants. MAGA clearly has these elements. January 6th is the obvious example.
And Reform UK has.
Yeah.
None of that. Zero. They're a protest party whose members go to rallies. They're not a paramilitary wing.
Third, the national claim. Trump claims to speak for the entire nation. He defines who the real Americans are, and he demands total loyalty.
Farage doesn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
He speaks to specific, defined grievances, mainly immigration, failures of Brexit. He's not offering this all-encompassing national identity myth that says all political enemies must be purged.
Okay, fourth. What happens to the established conservative party? In the U.S., the Republican Party was effectively captured. It was structurally redefined by its populist base. It became the vehicle for MAGA.
In the UK, the Conservative Party is, well, it's decaying electorally. It's collapsing under its own weight. But it's still institutionally intact. Reform is chipping away at its support, but it hasn't pulled off a hostile takeover of the party machine.
Right. And fifth.
Ideological coherence.
Yeah.
MAGA has a unified, almost cult-like worldview. It blends Christian nationalism, deep conspiracy theories, anti-state doctrine. It's all one comprehensive ideology.
And Reform UK
lacks that coherence. It's a jumble of different frustrations. Anger about immigration, vague calls for deregulation, tabloid culture wars, but it's not a unified alternative worldview.
So, if we apply this stringent historical and theoretical framework, the conclusion has to be that Reform is not proto-fascist.
Absolutely not. Trotsky would probably label Reform a brittle, protest-driven pressure party.
A pressure party.
Its job is to register dissatisfaction with the establishment and to push the Conservative Party further to the right, but not to fundamentally dismantle the state or launch a revolutionary political project.
That distinction you made, anger versus identity, that really feels like the core takeaway here.
I think it is.
Farage is brilliant at channeling profound anger at system failures. Trump channels a specific, radicalized identity that demands personal allegiance to his vision of the nation.
And Reform isn't Trumpism because, fundamentally, the UK is not the US, not socially, not ideologically, not institutionally, and certainly not emotionally.
So just to recap that side-by-side comparison, U.S. resentment is explosive.
And UK resentment is weary, annoyed.
Mass mobilization in the U.S. is high. It's sustained.
In the UK, it's low and it's transactional.
The U.S. threat is system level. It's a real danger to the health of its democracy. The UK threat is
electoral turbulence and stagnation.
So our synthesis here is pretty clear. The conditions for political crisis stagnation, inequality, distrust, they're there in both countries, no question.
But the form that crisis takes is dictated by all these deep structural, institutional, and cultural differences we've been talking about.
Reform is disruptive, not revolutionary.
Frustrated, but not mobilized in that necessary paramilitary sense.
Populist, yes, but not fascist, not in the specific way that Trotsky defined the term.
Right. It functions as an effective protest within the existing framework, not as a revolutionary force that wants to smash it.
Which leaves us then with a final provocative thought for you to consider. We've established that the UK's structural defenses, the regulated media, the fragmented regions, the pragmatic nature of its distrust, are the key things preventing a full-on MAGA-style movement. The system is cynical, but it's stable.
For now.
For now. So the question is this. What specific type of shock? A sudden, deep economic collapse, a constitutional crisis over Scottish independence, some kind of severe social shock. What would it take to push the UK's political mood from its current cynical sigh into that kind of mass, radicalized, mobilized movement that Trotsky described? It really is a question of whether institutional defenses, no matter how sturdy they seem, can truly last forever under the pressure of chronic stagnation.